For centuries, their names were a footnote, or erased entirely. Yet in the shadow between desert and river, a southern kingdom gathered strength and dared to claim Egypt's ancient crown. These were the Black Pharaohs of Kush, African kings who did not merely invade a weakened neighbor, but restored a civilization's heartbeat and reimagined what it meant to rule along the Nile. Our story begins in Nubia, in today's northern Sudan, where the Nile buckles through cataracts and the land narrows into corridors of stone. Long before their march north, the people of Kush built cities like Kerma and later Napata, traded gold, ebony, and ivory, fielded archers feared across the region, and cultivated a devotion to Amun that would become the spiritual engine of their rise. While Egypt fragmented during the Third Intermediate Period, local dynasts squabbling for temples, taxes, and titles. Enter Piye, also known as Piankhi, a king whose confidence bordered on destiny. He framed his campaign not as conquest but as correction. Egypt, he argued, had drifted from maat, cosmic order, and required a legitimate pharaoh to bind heaven and earth again. Marching down river, Piye took cities, demanded oaths, and commanded rival rulers to swear fidelity before Amun. His victory, stellar reads like theater and sermon. Gateways opened, strongholds fell, and the gods, he believed, restored their chosen line. With Piye's triumph, the 25th dynasty took shape. Its early capitals anchored near Jebel Bagal, a sandstone mountain Nubians revered as the seat of Amun's creative power. From there, Kushite pharaohs projected authority north into Thebes and Memphis, wearing the double crown with a new, unmistakable pride. They revived pyramid building at Kurru and later Nuri, raised colonnades, restored temples, and wrapped their politics in a language of renewal. We will cleanse, rebuild, remember. Piye's successors, Shabaka, Shebetku, Taharqa, each stamped the era with purpose. Shabaka gathered fragile memories into stone, preserving ancient theology on the now famous Shabaka stone. Shebetku steadied the throne and court. Taharqa, the most visible to posterity, became a builder, king. Pylons, kiosks, and vast additions at Karnak carried his name. Art took on robust forms, broad shoulders, powerful jaws, the Kushite cap, crown, projecting stability at a moment when empires churned. Yet the story was never simply cultural renaissance. Beyond Egypt's eastern frontier, Assyria expanded like a storm front. The Kushite court balanced ritual with realpolitik, assisting Levantine cities one season and parrying Assyrian campaigns the next. Taharqa could win battles and lose ground, triumph in reliefs, and bleed in correspondence. Power at the world's crossroads required nerve, allies, and relentless logistics. Even pious kings needed spears and grain. Still, for decades the Black Pharaohs gave Egypt something it had lacked: cohesion, spectacle, and a sense that the old gods had not abandoned their river. Processions filled Thebes, offerings smoked beneath sacred ram-headed avenues. Hymns to Amun rose in languages braided by trade and kinship. In the south, Nubian pyramids multiplied, steeper, clustered, defiant, sealing a royal house that had made empire by fusing two worlds rather than erasing either. Inevitably, the Assyrians struck harder. Memphis fell, Thebes was punished, and the dynasty yielded Egypt while surviving in Nubia. The last claimant, Tantamani, retreated upriver, and the balance of the Nile shifted again. But the 25th dynasty did not vanish as failure. It endured as precedent, Africans ruling Egypt with competence, piety, and architectural ambition. A southern kingdom insisting that universal order could flow upstream. This series will follow that arc in detail. In the next segments, we will meet the rulers behind the titles, read the rhetoric etched in stone, walk through Karnak's shadowed courts, and trace the diplomacy that carried Kushite emissaries from Napata to the Levant. We will ask what power meant to kings who saw themselves as guardians of maat, and how memory, curated by priests, carved by artisans, told by rivals, framed them as foreigners, reformers, or saviors depending on who held the pen. For now, hold a simple picture: twilight over the Nubian desert, pyramids at El Kurru casting long, triangular shadows, the river turning bronze in the last light. Somewhere beyond the bend, a messenger rides north with Piye's proclamations, and drums answer from village to village. Egypt is listening again. The Black Pharaohs have arrived. The year is around 747 BC. In the kingdom of Kush, south of Egypt, a storm is brewing, not of sand, but of destiny. King Piye, also called Piankhi, sits beneath the sacred cliffs of Jebel Bakal, where the wind carries whispers of the god Amun. Here, Piye believes he has been chosen not merely as a ruler, but as a guardian of maat, the divine balance between chaos and order. Egypt, meanwhile, is divided. The mighty empire of the pharaohs has splintered into warring provinces. Dozens of local kings, warlords, and priestly dynasts compete for control. In Thebes, priests claim divine authority. In the Delta, rival factions fortify their cities. From Memphis to Tanis, the Nile's ancient unity has dissolved into fragments. Piye watches this chaos from Napata, the Kushite capital. To him, Egypt is not a foreign land but the northern heart of the Nile, a land the gods entrusted to those who honor them, and he believes he alone carries that divine mandate. In a dramatic act of faith, Piye orders a great ritual at the temple of Amun. Sacrifices are made, incense curls into the Nubian air, and Piye prays for victory, not just for himself but for Egypt's salvation. His proclamation will later be carved into stone: "I am sent by Amun himself to restore the two lands. Those who resist me resist the gods." Then the march begins. Piye's army moves north along the Nile, traveling on warships and chariots. Unlike the Egyptians, the Kushites are masters of archery. Their tas-edi archers are feared across the region, capable of piercing armor from incredible distances. Alongside them march elite infantry, horsemen, and supply caravans carrying grain and wine. As they advance, cities fall one by one, not always through bloodshed but through awe. Piye's strategy isn't just military, it's spiritual. At each captured city, he insists on purifying the local temples, making offerings, and demanding allegiance to Amun of Jebel Bakal. For Piye, conquest is meaningless without divine legitimacy. Then comes the turning point: Memphis, one of Egypt's greatest cities, fortified and heavily defended. A coalition of northern rulers rallies here, determined to stop the Kushite advance. For days, the city resists, its walls lined with archers, its canals turned into moats. But Piye's forces are relentless. They seize the harbors, cut off supply routes, and finally storm the gates. Inside Memphis, the surviving rulers are summoned before Piye. One by one, they kneel, kissing the ground, swearing allegiance to him as the true pharaoh. Piye doesn't humiliate them. He spares their lives but commands obedience. This moment is immortalized on the victory stela of Piye, found centuries later, where his triumph is written not as a personal achievement, but as the will of the gods. By the end of his campaign, Piye has unified most of Egypt under Kushite rule. He returns to Napata rather than ruling from Memphis, believing the divine power of kingship flows from Jebel Bakal itself. This decision shapes the character of the 25th dynasty, a dynasty rooted in Nubian culture, yet carrying Egypt's ancient crown. Piye dies around 714 BC, but his conquest lays the foundation for a new order. His successors, Shabaka, Shebitku, and Taharqa, inherit not just territory but a vision to revive Egypt's golden age, restore temples, and protect the Nile's sacred rhythm from foreign threats. Yet even as Kushite banners rise across the Nile Valley, a darker storm gathers on the horizon: the Assyrian Empire. ruthless, technologically advanced, and determined to dominate the Near East. Assyria will soon test the Black Pharaoh's strength in ways I never faced. But before the clash of empires, there is peace, brief, luminous, and filled with grand ambitions. The Kushite kings begin projects that will leave behind colossal temples, magnificent pyramids, and sacred inscriptions that still whisper across the sands today. The sun rises over the golden sands of Nubia, and with it rises a king whose name would echo across millennia. Taharqa, the warrior-pharaoh, the builder of temples, and the ruler whose reign would mark the zenith of the 25th dynasty. Born around 710 BC in the Kushite royal house, Taharqa was the nephew of Piye and the son of Piye's brother Shabaka, who had already strengthened Kushite control over Egypt. Yet, when Taharqa ascended to the throne in 690 BC, he inherited more than a crown. He inherited a dream, a vision of restoring Egypt's lost glory and defending the Nile against the rising powers of the ancient world. From the moment Taharqa became pharaoh, his reign carried an almost divine aura. Ancient records describe his coronation at Napata, where the sacred mountain Jebel Bakal cast its shadow across the gathered priests and nobles. The priests of Amun declared that Taharqa had been chosen by the gods themselves, a king destined to protect both Nubia and Egypt under one crown. Taharqa's Egypt was prosperous, powerful, and culturally vibrant. He invested heavily in rebuilding the heart of Egyptian religion, the great temples. At Karnak, he commissioned colossal pylons and elegant courtyards. At Kawa, along the Nile in Nubia, he built sanctuaries adorned with reliefs depicting himself standing before Amun, Maat, and other gods, emphasizing his divine right to rule. Yet Taharqa was not merely a builder, he was a strategist and warrior. The Nile Valley thrived under his administration, and trade routes stretched deep into Africa and across the Mediterranean. Gold, ivory, incense, exotic animals all flowed northward through Kushite control, strengthening the empire's wealth and influence. But far to the northeast, a new power was rising, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, led by the relentless kings Sennacherib and later Esarhaddon. Unlike Piye's campaigns against fragmented Egyptian rivals, Taharqa faced an empire of unmatched brutality and military innovation. The Assyrians wielded iron weapons, siege engines, and highly disciplined armies. To them, Egypt and Kush were not sacred lands, they were prizes, resources, trophies. Taharqa understood the threat, and he prepared for it. He fortified Egypt's eastern borders and forged alliances with small Levantine kingdoms, including Judah and Tyre, hoping to create a buffer against the Assyrian onslaught. For a time, his diplomacy held, and the Kushite Empire enjoyed a rare period of peace. But in 701 BC, the Assyrian king Sennacherib launched his infamous Levant campaign. According to the Hebrew Bible, Taharqa, referred to as Taharqa, king of Kush, marched north to aid Judah against Assyrian siege forces. Though the details are debated, this episode underscores Taharqa's vast influence. His armies reached deep into the Levant, challenging one of the most feared empires in history. The confrontation escalated when Sennacherib's successor, Esarhaddon, set his sights directly on Egypt. In 674 BC, Assyrian armies invaded, but Taharqa's forces delivered a stunning victory, driving them back. For a brief moment, the Black Pharaoh stood unchallenged, hailed as a defender of Egypt and the Nile. But the Assyrians were relentless. 3 years later, in 671 BC, Esarhaddon returned with an even larger army. This time, Memphis fell. Egyptian cities burned, and Taharqa retreated south to Thebes, vowing to rebuild his strength. Despite the loss, his legend only grew. To his followers, Taharqa was not defeated but tested by the gods, chosen to endure trials greater than any pharaoh before him. Taharqa's reign represents the pinnacle of the Kushite period, a time when Egypt, under African kingship, reclaimed its dignity and power. His monuments still stand, his pyramids still pierce the Nubian sky, and his name remains immortalized in texts across Egypt, Assyria, and even the Bible. Yet the storm was far from over. As Taharqa rebuilt his forces, the Assyrians prepared a final strike, one that would decide the fate of the entire Nile Valley and change the balance of power forever. By the mid-7th century BCE, the empire of the Black Pharaohs stood at its greatest height, but also its greatest danger. While Taharqa's monuments rose across the Nile Valley, a new storm gathered in the east. The Assyrian Empire, under the iron rule of Esarhaddon and later Ashurbanipal, had become the most powerful military machine the ancient world had ever seen. The Assyrians were relentless, masters of siege warfare and psychological terror. Their armies were equipped with iron weapons, battering rams, and archers capable of overwhelming entire cities in days. They had crushed Babylon, dominated the Levant, and now their ambitions turned west toward Egypt and Kush. In 674 BC, the Assyrians launched their first invasion into Egypt. Against all odds, Taharqa and his Kushite army met them head-on and won a stunning victory, driving them back beyond the Sinai. For a brief moment, Egypt rejoiced. The Nile Valley celebrated its Black Pharaoh as the defender of the two lands, but the Assyrians did not forgive defeat. They returned 3 years later, stronger, faster, and deadlier. In 671 BC, Esarhaddon led a massive campaign directly into Egypt, marching with an army of siege engines, cavalry, and hardened soldiers from across the empire. This time, the battle was brutal. The Egyptian defenses at Memphis crumbled. The city fell, and Assyrian banners flew over its walls. Taharqa fled south to Thebes, regrouping his forces and refusing to surrender. For several years, he launched counter-offensives, reclaiming portions of Upper Egypt and inspiring a wave of resistance against Assyrian occupation. But the conflict drained the Kushite state. Resources dwindled, soldiers fell, and the Assyrians only tightened their grip. When Taharqa died in 664 BCE, his nephew Tantamani ascended the throne and became the last great hope of the Kushite dynasty. Driven by pride and the sacred duty to restore the two lands, Tantamani marched north to reclaim what was lost. For a moment, victory seemed possible. His forces swept through Upper Egypt, retaking Thebes and Memphis. But Assyria's response was swift and devastating. In 663 BC, under Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian army unleashed one of the most brutal campaigns in Egyptian history. They stormed Thebes, the ancient city of the gods, the jewel of Upper Egypt. What followed became a legend of destruction. Temples ransacked, sacred statues looted, and the once great city set aflame. The burning of Thebes marked not just the collapse of Kushite power in Egypt, it symbolized the end of an era. Tantamani retreated south into Nubia, his dream shattered. The Kushite kings would never again rule over Egypt. For the Assyrians, it was a triumph carved into history. For the Kushites, it was a wound that would echo for centuries. Yet despite this devastating defeat, the story of the Black Pharaohs did not vanish into the sands. The Kushite kingdom endured, thriving at Napata and later at Meroe, where new pyramids rose and African kingship continued for hundreds of years. Their influence on Egyptian religion, architecture, and culture persisted long after their armies withdrew. But Egypt itself would never be the same. After the fall of the 25th dynasty, power shifted to the Sate rulers of the 26th dynasty, who were supported by the Assyrians. Egypt was no longer an independent giant, but a contested prize between empires, a stage upon which Persia, Greece, and Rome would later compete. The Black Pharaohs had burned brightly, fusing African identity with Egyptian heritage, building monuments that still stand, and resisting one of history's most powerful armies. And though they were driven from Egypt, their legacy became unshakable. The pyramids of Kurru and Nuri, the inscriptions at Kawa, and the colossal statues of Taharqa remain silent witnesses to a time when kings from the south ruled the land of the pharaohs. The story of the Black Pharaohs could have ended with fire and silence. After the fall of Thebes in 663 BC, the Kushite kings retreated deep into Nubia, ruling from Napata and later Meroe, while Egypt slipped into Assyrian control. For centuries, their memory faded, buried beneath shifting sands and rewritten histories. Egypt's later rulers, the Saite kings of the 26th dynasty, had little interest in celebrating a time when foreign-born kings ruled the two lands. In their inscriptions, the Kushites became footnotes. In Greek accounts, they were often dismissed as outsiders, their names distorted or erased. And so, for over 2 millennia, the Black Pharaohs became ghosts in history. Their pyramids lay forgotten under desert winds, their temples swallowed by sand, their monuments crumbling under time's weight. The world believed Egypt's golden age belonged only to the dynasties of the north. The kings of Kush had been written out of memory, until one day they weren't. In the early 19th century, European explorers pushing south along the Nile stumbled upon strange clusters of pyramids, unlike anything they had seen in Egypt. At places like Kurru, Nuri, and Meroe, dozens of steep, elegant pyramids rose from the Nubian desert. The locals knew of them, but to the wider world, they were a revelation. Archaeologists followed. In the 1820s, Frédéric Kelliot, a French explorer, documented the pyramids and brought drawings back to Europe, sparking curiosity but little understanding. It wasn't until the late 19th and early 20th centuries that systematic excavations began. Among the most significant discoveries was the Victories stela of Piye, unearthed at Jebel Barkal. Its inscriptions told the story of a Kushite king who dared to conquer Egypt, an African pharaoh who declared divine authority from the gods themselves. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. The kings of Kush were no longer footnotes. They were central characters in Egypt's ancient drama. In the 20th century, excavations at Kawa, Nuri, and Jebel Barkal uncovered temples, statues, and tombs belonging to kings like Taharqa, Shabaka, and Tantamani. One colossal statue of Taharqa, over 2 meters tall, revealed a powerful, proud ruler whose image had been erased from Egyptian records, but preserved in stone beneath the sands of Nubia. Modern science added new layers to the story. Using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging, archaeologists located dozens of lost pyramids and burial chambers. DNA analysis and isotope studies traced the movement of Nubian lineages, proving the deep African roots of the 25th dynasty. What history once ignored, science began to restore. Today, museums across the world display the art and architecture of the Kushite pharaohs. The British Museum houses statues of Taharqa. The Sudan National Museum in Khartoum preserves reliefs, jewelry, and sacred artifacts from their temples. Documentaries, scholarly papers, and exhibitions now shine light on a dynasty once left in shadow. But the most powerful rediscovery is not in museums, it is in memory. The kings of Kush, Piye, Shabaka, Taharqa, Tantamani have reclaimed their place in the great story of humanity. They ruled at a time when empires collided, when religion, politics, and identity wove together along the Nile. Their achievements remind us that African history does not begin or end with Egypt, but flows deeper, richer, and broader than the boundaries carved into modern maps. As we stand today among the pyramids of Nuri, where more than 80 Kushite kings and queens lie beneath sharp desert silhouettes, The wind carries whispers of a forgotten empire. These stones speak of ambition, faith, and resilience. They speak of a time when kings from the south ruled Egypt with vision and pride, and when history nearly let their names disappear. But now, the Black Pharaohs are forgotten no more.